Okay, guys, it's 8:30, so we're going to start. Obviously, we'll run through what we're going to talk about today. So we'll give some people will have a few minutes to still connect in. So yeah, welcome to part 6 of the breakfast webinar series on chartership competencies. So yeah, this week 6, we're looking at B4 today. My name's Iain Stevenson. I work for Thames Water in the asset management team. My job title is Strategic Network Specialist, and I work in the hydraulic modelling team in the clean water section. Okay, so yeah, just run through what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to introduce the competency, look at the key questions that you need to answer for this competency. We have 4 examples today, and then just run down of the activities that you can do today or this week, and then look at cross-referencing to other accreditations. So yeah, this is a slide we had last week where we looked at B3, but this week we're looking at B4. As you can see, it is the ability to plan and implement solutions and monitor their continuing performance. So this is quite a nice slide. You can see the difference between the B competencies. So we looked at the problem, we looked at options, we looked at change. Now we're looking at solutions. So yeah, this is the competency as it's laid out. The ability to plan and implement solutions and monitor their continued performance. You need to demonstrate you can efficiently plan for and implement solutions. It gives you a couple of examples there. Complying with the appropriate standards, and it gives you some more examples: health and safety, quality assurance, cost, resource management. Identifying risks that may compromise the outcome. And it says you will need to demonstrate that you can evaluate performance against the initial specification that was agreed with the client stakeholder. You will need to demonstrate the ability to learn from and amend operating procedures using performance criteria and data collection as appropriate. These are the key questions that are also given to you to help you answer this. I won't read through this, but I've highlighted some of the key words in there. Obviously, plan, manage, explaining what the issue was, which is always the first thing you need to do. Monitor, root cause of any problems. What did you do to resolve them? How did you ensure continuing operation? What actions did you take? How did you minimize risk? Did you audit it or do an appraisal? What was the outcome? If you didn't achieve an outcome, what was the corrective action? And did you produce any relevant documentation or training package? So you don't need to answer all these questions, but this gives you a really good breakdown of things you need to look at to try and write this competency. So examples, example 1. In a new and growing office, it was necessary to continually implement and monitor systems from production of government tenders down to composting policy of the office. With my team, I closely monitor the progress of my own and office projects and management systems through regular meetings with team members. So the first bit, I've done a little bit of work for you already that's helping me do this presentation. So it explains the issue at the top, then it explains how that issue is monitored and how it was implemented. One of the major roles has been to develop a resourcing plan for the office. Initially, I was the only technical member of staff. A simple diary log was sufficient. The complexity of workload planning and importance of good resourcing has become more important as the office grows. I've therefore implemented a new planning system which draws from project profiles and staff timesheets. So that explains implementation and also the continuing operation. Second example, so the first one was a resource example. Here's a bit more of a project example. As part of the current flood risk mapping project, only level gauge data are available. In an attempt to validate a rating for a hydraulic model, I've organised the provision of flow gauge equipment, and I'm monitoring the level on a daily basis with the aim of obtaining spot gauges if higher flows are recorded. So again, laid out what the issue was, explained monitoring, what the monitoring is happening on the project. Before this data can be incorporated in the study, I will be required to assess the performance and validity of this data to ensure that it is of a good quality by making comparisons between modelled and observed flow levels. So yeah, this is a good example here. It's explaining validation, explaining an audit, and lays out how any unsatisfactory performance would be resolved. Throughout the study, I will monitor the gauge and any outputs that could be used to the Environment Agency that will be provided at the end of the study. A third example here, looking at a clean water example. I designed and verified new pressure managed areas to reduce the pressure in some sections of the network and therefore leakage. So one sentence to lay out the issue. This reduces the requirement to take more water from the environment and the use of energy and chemicals to treat it. It also calmed the distribution network and is a cost beneficial way to extend the life of assets. So this small sentence is a little example of trying to explain the environmental side of a water issue, which is very helpful. Obviously, I work in the water industry, and one of my problems was trying to explain the more environmental side of what I do. So it's a water problem, but all water problems will have an environmental impact as well. So that's an example of that. I completed the targeted review of high pressure areas in the network with suitably sized DMAs with good leakage savings. So that's like a metered area. So there's the audit part of it. I sized the appropriate new assets, produced construction schematics. I assisted through the commissioning process, improved pressure and flow information that was later used to calculate actual savings. So that was an example of post-project appraisal. After solution implementation, burst rates and supply interruption decreased, and the target leakage saving of 1 megalitre a day was achieved. So our last example today. I work with the environmental team at a water company, liaising with farmers to encourage sustainable farming practices within the River Cuckmere catchment, which protected water quality within the river and associated raw water storage. Developing an abstraction management strategy was business critical to ensure metaldehyde, a difficult to treat pesticide, which, although not posing no threat to health or the environment, must not enter the reservoir at concentrations which breach EU drinking water standards. So there's some information and background, and also explains what standards are being looked at in this example. Working to reduce farmers' use of metaldehyde by using alternative ferric phosphate and reducing soil erosion, for example, through gas buffer strips, migrating the potential for pesticides absorbed into soil particles to run off fields into the watercourses. So there's how it was implemented. I think this continues a little bit. It's a long one. In addition, I promoted further mitigation by producing an operating procedure for river extraction to the reservoir. This monitored river flows, turbidity, metaldehyde, and reservoir storage to ensure that abstraction avoided the first flush of metaldehyde through the system at the end of the summer, start of the autumn. So there's explain the monitoring side of this problem. During the second year of implementing my management strategy, I worked with water quality to reduce the turnaround time of metaldehyde results from 4 days to 24 hours. This supported real-time performance monitoring for the solution and stakeholder feedback on the positive reductions in metaldehyde resulting from the catchment management, and also ensuring ongoing application of the strategy. So it's a good example. It shows improvement, shows I put corrective action there, but it explains that something changed and there was an action to help with this example, and also explains the results. So yeah, we've given you four examples today. So if you can, activity for today, discuss with your peers types of research and investigation you have carried out. What were the methods to evaluate the options? What were the successful outcomes? And were there any lessons that you learned from unsuccessful problems? So as I kind of mentioned, I've done a little bit of this for you, but it's probably a very good idea to go back and look at these examples and highlight them, as Jack explained last week. Take 3 highlighters and mark up examples where you see plan, implement, and monitor within those examples. So I've summarized it a little bit, but you can actually pinpoint where those points are. Prepare 5 bullet points for projects that you've worked on in your career. Consider how the ability to plan and implement solutions, and how were those solutions continually monitored? How did you know that they worked or didn't work? Now mark up your evidence with the same 3 colours that cover the 3 aspects of this competency. So if you're working towards other accreditations along with your Chartered Water and Environmental Manager, there is Chartered Engineer, Chartered Scientist, and Chartered Environmentalist. And as you can see through there, these are the corresponding competencies for those parts. So you've got implementing design solutions for an engineer, and also effective project implementation for a scientist, analysis and solutions of problems, and again, organizing projects efficiently, along with influencing and negotiating skills. And for environmentalists, evaluating problems from an environmental perspective, developing practical, sustainable solutions, and anticipating environmental trends to develop practical solutions. Couple of tips we always talk about that shouldn't really be forgotten when you're writing up your competencies. Always write in the first person. Use I, not we. It's very easy, especially in the interview that we'll talk about in a little minute, to say we a lot. Be honest about your contribution to the project. Understand why you're doing particular tasks. What was the bigger picture? This is quite important. Lots of projects are quite have quite a narrow scope, looking at a very particular thing. But why is this? Why is that scope important to what is the bigger picture? What's the environmental picture or the water issue? Be concise. You've only got so many words, around 300 or so per competency. Remember what you've written, come your interview, and don't limit your experience to your current employment. So you just got some extra tips today. I brought these up a couple of weeks ago. Continue your work on your submission. Best to go slow, steady, and consistent. So just do a little bit every week as we work through this series. Be realistic about your date of submission. Don't think you're going to do it in 2 months. Maybe 6 months or a year is a more achievable deadline. Look for opportunities. How can you diversify? Likelihood is you work in a very specific team within a company or a consultancy. Yeah, and try and speak to other people around you and how you can try and diversify. If you work in water, how you can get some experience in environmental side and vice versa. Track your CPD continually. There's quite a lot of webinars going on at the moment. Training's online. So you will forget and you'll spend hours, if not days, trying to remember all your CPD from the previous 2 or 3 years. So just set up a spreadsheet, put the date in, put how many hours it is, put the title and what you learnt, just 5 minutes for each piece of CPD. And a good way of doing it is to save flyers or your calendar entries from your Outlook. Jack was supposed to bring this up last week, so I'm throwing it in here because I think it's really important. Accountability. We're talking about working on your submission. It's really good to create some accountability. So I put mentor there. It doesn't have to be your mentor. It just has to be somebody, maybe a line manager, maybe someone in your office who's a little bit more experienced. Just tell them that you're doing your chartership and you're working towards it to a particular date, and you can just check in with them or they check in with you about how you're getting on, which I think is really, really helpful. Interview. There's a lot of work to do on competencies, but one of the quite important bits is the interview, that the professional interview, which is later, and it's just a idea here to keep it in mind. You work quite a lot on these competencies for months, and then suddenly you get your email through saying you've got your interview, and then you think about your interview. So it's just a little tip there to kind of start thinking about that, thinking about you have to do a 10-minute presentation on a particular project, so start thinking about that, but also thinking about practicing interviews. If you're less experienced or a little bit nervous, something to think about working on before you get your date for your interview. So we're just talking about mentoring a little bit there. There is now a page on the CIWEM website for mentoring. So this is for mentees and mentors. So if you need a mentor, you can take a look at this and hopefully find one. But also, if you know any mentors that would be happy to sign up for this, can you let them know about it? Because there's only a very limited number of people that's just been set up. So more mentors are required. And the other point is, if you're looking to get chartered fairly soon and want to fast track your chartership, as we've spoken about before, there is a paid course through CIWEM where you'll have a more one-to-one discussion about your career report, your competencies, and help with what might come up in the interview. So that's it for part 6. I think it's actually part 7 next week, not part 8, but that's with Jack. So that's it. So we'll go to the questions and answers. Do you recommend having more than one example for the B competencies, or is one of these examples enough? will the interviewers expect us to have more examples to draw on in the interview? I think this question's come up a few times. I think it's always good to have 2 examples for each competency. And we've talked about it before, it's quite a strong one, and then maybe one that's a little less strong. So yeah, 2 examples, unless you've got a very, very good one, but always having more examples would be better. And yes, the interviewers might try and say, hey, have you had the same problem or a different problem? So you should be prepared for that. From the examples we've seen for all the B competencies, they appear to be longer in length than the A's. In your opinion, is there a majority of the word count should be used, and which one would you say should be the lengthiest? I think the B's should be the lengthiest ones. The A's are about, trying to remember now, like, what are the environmental problems at the moment, or the ongoing issues, and they can be summarized quite in a shorter version. I think the C's and the D's, some of those can be quite short, as we'll get on to in the next few weeks. It's like personal things like CPD. CPD kind of explains itself because you also create a long list of that. Communicating in English can be very short. So there's plenty of words that can be used. These are the very project-specific examples. So yes, try and use your word count in the B's more, I would say. Your example 4 is a very good example, but if you're part of a wider team delivering a project like this, would you state this or just say you did X, Y, Z? I can't say exactly what you're getting, but yeah, you have to say what you did. And yes, you're always part of a team, but yeah, you have to say what you did within that team. In those examples, there wasn't a great mention of team. It sounded like each person was doing the project on their own, which I know wasn't the case. But yeah, I think you have to explain what the project was and what you did on the project, if that answers your question. Can you use the same examples for other competencies? I think the best thing is to use separate examples, especially for the B competencies. I expect you can use.
Just Jack. I think if you're working, sometimes it can be challenging if you're working on a very big project. You might be working on that for a number of years. Think about different aspects of that one project. So it could still be within the same project, but it'd be different examples or different aspects that you've come across in your work at different stages of the project as well. So don't feel that it has to be a completely different setting geographically, or just think about the different challenges. And so you might be implementing solutions now, but 6 months ago you might have been identifying problems in a slightly different area.
Yep, that's good. Obviously, yeah. And then if there's change on a project, that was last week's competency. CIWEM and CEng competency both can be the same example, or should it be separate from each other? Jack, can you jump in here?
Yeah, so we've just had one through on the chat as well. So I think the previous question was also thinking about CIWEM and chartered scientists. So similar, can you use the same competency for both your chartered water environmental manager paperwork as well as the others? So again, you can do the greater depth you can show. So if you've got the breadth of experience to use different ones, and they tailor slightly better to what you're focusing. So for instance, if you're looking at chartered engineer, having a slightly more engineered focused B4 example would be fantastic for that. But there's nothing to say that your chartered water environmental example can't also be engineering focused, or if you're going for chartered scientist, chartered environmentalist, tying those together, there's nothing to say it has to be completely different. But if you can use a different one, then again, it just shows that breadth of experience you've got, and you're basically getting three words there to show greater depth and provide more evidence by going for those two submissions at the same time.
This question: would you mention the name of your company you work for when providing examples? Yes, you do. With these examples, we've just removed some varying information. So yeah, if you work for Thames Water, you say on project X for Thames Water, I needed to look at this. So yes, you would.
And by project X, you'd name the project as well, just to...
Yeah, name the project. So someone's asked about we just go back. Yeah, B1 and B4 seem very similar. What should be the difference in the emphasis between the answers?
So I think that for me, the key one here is looking at the analysis and evaluation of problems, whereas for B1, and whereas B4, we're looking at the planning and monitoring solutions. So in terms of analysis and evaluating problems, just looking at what is the problem and framing the questions around that. So your understanding of the problem. Whereas what we're looking at for B4 is actually addressing that problem with a solution. So planning how you would address that. So the introduction to the issue here could be very, very brief, and it's basically half a sentence saying there was this issue and this is how I planned, implemented, and then monitored its resolution. If you look back at the key questions for B1 and the key questions for B4, that should really help you frame those up. Sorry, Ian.
Yeah, I need your help here. I volunteered for a local cricket club and part of the redesign and launch of their website and all their PR. Is it okay to use this as non-professional experience?
So definitely non-professional volunteering experience is absolutely relevant. I think in this example, if it is possible to put an environmental spin on it, or water environmental spin on it, to understand the environmental benefits of the relaunch and PR, that would be even better. Just because obviously we are looking at CIWEM or chartered scientist, chartered environmentist, chartered engineer. So if you could sort of demonstrate that as part of that, you highlighted the environmental credentials of the club, you attracted new members and support the vitality of the club, that would be good.
It could also be, I would say, also could be used on other competencies. On the communicating English part of it, and
yeah,
I think it's CPD as well. Like you're learning new skills, probably, because I do a bit of website work and I have to do a lot of learning to try and figure out how to do things on websites. So yeah, maybe I think not on B, but on other competencies, yes.
I think if all of your examples were for work from other sectors and we didn't really touch on water environment, we would struggle with this. But I think bringing in, as I say, volunteer experience or external work or second jobs or whatever, absolutely fine. Shows again breadth of your experience.
And there's also one good point on the chat that CIWEM has the management of CPD on your profile rather than using a spreadsheet. So I suppose that just comes down to personal preference in terms of how you're logging your CPD. Some people choose to record it in a spreadsheet and then as they're doing their application, transfer it across to the CIWEM matrix. But yeah,
set up a spreadsheet that looks exactly like, just has the same headings as what's on the My CIWEM page. Yeah. It's useful. Yeah, it's a cut and paste heavy operation, but it's doable.
I think one thing to say when we'll come on to CPD in future sessions is just on that CIWEM matrix for CPD, it asks you to say what you got out of that particular event or the bit of CPD that you've done. And I think that's maybe, so it's not only what you've attended, how many hours you spent, but also what you personally got out of it. So it's worth having a look at that just to see what's required. But yeah, we will cover that in a future session.
Iain, could you just take us onto your next slide for me, please, the key questions? There you go. So the one thing I just wanted to emphasise on this is that whilst the focus of the competencies plan, manage and monitor, plan, implement and monitor, excuse me, the questions that follow on from that really are just trying to tease that out for you. So don't feel like you have to talk about how you plan, implement and monitor, and then also talk about what actions you did to resolve, how do you ensure continued operation, what mitigation actions you do. Those are all part, those following questions are all part of how you planned, how you implemented and how you monitored. Just to give you, they're just rephrasing the question in slightly different ways and breaking it down a bit further. So I've seen a couple of people when I've been reviewing things for them previously, they've tried to address all the key questions in sequential order. Or really think about it in two halves. The top sort of 4 questions are the succinct version. If you can answer those straight away, job's done. But the following questions are really sub-points to those. So things like, how did you, what plans were prepared to ensure continuing operation? That's part of your implementation. What was the audit and appraisal as part of your monitoring? What did you do if you did not achieve it, what was expected, and corrective action? Again, that's part of monitoring and updating your implementation. So don't feel like, as I say, you have to do them all in order. They're really there to help tease out the answers for you.
Yeah, we've just got a couple more questions on CPD. It's just the CIWEM website that you can provide your CPD record in an alternative format, your own spreadsheet rather than the CIWEM format. I think when you are putting in your application, you have to upload it, or you have to put everything in the format that's on the CIWEM website when you're applying. But I think at any other time, you can just save it in a spreadsheet, and if you are asked, you can provide that spreadsheet.
Yeah, so even once you become a member, maintaining your CPD records is important, particularly some of the charters, like chartered scientists, you have to submit your log every year. But I don't believe they're particularly precious about what format it is, as long as it's a suitable format. Yeah. So
someone's asked a very similar question. Does your CPD have to be logged on the CIWEM website, or can you attach a spreadsheet? For your application, you will have to put it, I think you will have to put it into you have to kind of like upload it all online, and it will involve copying your box from your spreadsheet and putting it in the relevant box on the website. But I would not get worried about where you save it. The point is that you should save it and you should record it. How you get it into your application is a fairly minor point. It's that you've recorded it and thought about it and made some clear points about what you learned.
Yeah, the hardest point at the moment is just getting words on a page for people. So I think as long as you've got it somewhere, don't worry about it getting on the website just yet. But if you feel like it's easy to do that from now, then go for it. But don't let the lack of internet connectivity put you off recording it. I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for everybody who joined us today. So we've got C1 next week with Jack. So see you all next week. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Iain.
Thanks, Iain.
Cheers.
Yes, thank you, Iain and Jack and Catherine as well. And thank you for everybody who has signed in today. I wish you luck with your chartership applications, and we will hopefully see you all next week.